Hello, everyone, and welcome to the cutting room. This is something a little bit different. Normally, this is what I do is kind of on the website or on Twitter. But I was invited to speak to some of the Emmy nominees. And whereas I was working my way down the list, I got to the editing team from Welcome to Wrexham. And as both a football fan, a fan of sports documentaries, and as occasionally an editor of sports and football documentaries, I thought these are exactly the guys that I would like to speak to. So I'm here today with Curtis McConnell and Mohamed El Manasterly, who are nominated for an Emmy for outstanding picture editing for an unstructured reality program. That's a real mouthful. But I'm sure you guys are. Have you guys ever been nominated for or even won an Emmy before? I should have looked that up before we
I did.
started.
I did. I won a primetime Emmy in 2014 for a documentary called The Square.
Oh,
It's,
yes. Oh, of course. Yes.
it's about the Egyptian Revolution, and that's my story of how I came to the US. Actually, I was invited to come to attend the Oscars because the feature was nominated for an Oscar, and I came to Los Angeles and I fell in love with it, and I never went back.
The classic story. I went somewhere and then I thought, no, I'm not going home. I was going to stay here. So guys, thank you very much for taking the time to come and chat. So just to give everyone who doesn't know what the Cutting Room is a quick breakdown. The Cutting Room is a website and a Twitter account that is basically aimed at budding film and TV editors and teaching or helping to teach you how to think, how to act, and how to edit like a professional editor. So we do, yes, we say we have a website, we have a Twitter account, also do some courses, and we have a monthly newsletter. My name is Neil, and I'm a working film and TV editor based in London. As I say, I sometimes edit football documentaries. I also edit feature length fiction and factual programs. And what I'm going to do today is chat to Mohamed and Curtis about working on Welcome to Wrexham, their work on the finale, which is up for the Emmy. And I'm just going to ask them a few questions about their process and how things went, very much from a kind of editors and post-production perspective. Mohamed, you've told me a little bit about your kind of background. How did you get started as an editor?
It's interesting. My background was actually music. So I'm a musician. I play percussions, and I used to DJ back in college. And during an advertising course, we needed an editor to edit the commercial, and I'm the one who took this task. When I started editing, I loved it because I found a lot of similarities between like creating a DJ set and constructing a story. I love the idea of taking people on a journey. But with the editing, compared to like DJing, you only have music to influence people. But with editing, you have picture, you have sound design, you have actual people, you have dialogue. So I fell in love with it. Spent hours and hours cutting and not feeling how many hours I've been working. I realized my passion, and I've been there ever since. I started my career doing a lot of music videos, commercials, news shows, and all these disciplines later really helped me out with documentaries because it gave me speed. I was able to cut beautiful montages, and I was able to tell the story in a very concise way, but at the same time, it's coherent and compelling.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard a few people say, "Oh, yeah, I ended up as an editor because no one else wanted to edit this thing I was wanting." But I feel sometimes maybe where the editors are the goalkeepers of film and TV. It's like, oh, no one wanted to go and go, so I ended up there before
It's a
you know it.
very accurate description.
Yeah, I like a good sports film kind of metaphor crossover kind of thing. Yeah. And how about you, Curtis? How did you get started out as an editor?
Yeah, so I mean, to go way back, I grew up in Southern Africa, and did not have much exposure to TV or film. I lived in Namibia, which is like, I don't know, there's like a million people in the whole country, or at least there was back then. And yeah, so but I've always had a love for just like storytelling, love for theater, love for just writing and that. And so I came to the US to go to college. While I was there, I ended up kind of falling into like film production and kind of learning about, just all of the different sort of mass media type stuff. So that's what I ended up majoring in. And then basically moved to Los Angeles with the intention of becoming a writer, because that was what my love was. That was like what I knew. But while I was in college, I had learned some of the basics of how to use Avid Media Composer, and didn't realize how significant that skill set would be. So as I was out here, struggling to find anybody that would be willing to take a meeting or whatever for writing, I ended up at just like some party down in Beverly Hills. Got into a conversation with somebody. I was desperate. I was like about to like just take a job working in a coffee shop just because I, had to make money. But yeah, I ended up in this conversation. She ended up being like a sort of post manager person or whatever. And she was like, "Oh, hey, do you happen to know how to use Avid?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Oh, we need somebody to do some casting reels, just to edit some casting reels. You interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do whatever." And she was like, "All right, well, you start Monday. You'll be working the night shift." So I went in on Monday and yeah, got my first job as a casting editor. So cutting these like, 2-3 minute high intensity little packages to try to sell. This was in more like reality TV stuff. So it was like shows like The Super Nanny and I don't know, shows for like MTV or whatever. And yeah, like that was how I started. I ended up just kind of skipping over the whole assistant editor thing, which was great for me. I mean, there's certainly skills that I wish that I had that like other AEs or people that have been AEs have, but no, it's great. Like it's a different path than I think a lot of editors have had, which is like kind of working in the pre-production side of things, doing casting, and then I moved into development, cutting sizzle reels, like concept reels and things like that. And then eventually kind of work my way into the post-production side of things.
Yeah, I did a bit of the skipping the kind of AE stage as well, for various reasons. It's funny because I think a lot of people spend a lot of time kind of doing that, and obviously that's massively beneficial. And yeah, I sometimes feel as well like, oh, there's some things that I kind of missed out on a little bit when it came to doing that.
Yeah,
So
I did not. I did not. I did my fair share of assisting, about like a year and a half or something. At the beginning of it, I was trying to break into the industry back home in Egypt because I'm Egyptian. So I used to offer editors my services for free, and I used to just be like, I used to enjoy just being in the post house and witnessing everything that is happening. And there's like believe it or not, there's some sort of a rush when there's a deadline, and I used to love watching the editors rushing to finish their shows for the deadlines. And I used to offer to do sound sync, or organize folders, and my pay was to just sit next to them and watch them edit. And this was great for me, like just seeing real pros doing their job. I learned a lot from it.
yeah, I definitely think because I had a period kind of early on in my career where I was working like just myself in I was basically the post department for a tiny little 2-man production company. And there's things I look back on there that I think like, ooh, like certainly don't tell people to do that nowadays. And I think that, yeah, the idea of mentorship and kind of passing down skills is really important, obviously that's part of what the cutting room is for. And I kind of do I teach editing as well. And yeah, there's a few things I did early in my career that I just think, oh, if only I'd known better, anyway.
Oh man. All the time. I can't watch the stuff that I've done like a few years ago because I'm like, oh, that's painful.
Yeah.
That's how you learn, though.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think also that's what's great about our job, is that every year you learn so much. And you would think like, what more can you learn? But then you deal with a new director, or like collaborate with other editors, and see like the variety of ways that you can tell a story, and then you start like getting ideas from the different people that you collaborate with, and then you add them to your toolkit, and start using them, and blend them the way that works for you. And yeah, it's fascinating how much we learn every year and how much we improve our storytelling techniques.
Yeah, I did a week as an additional editor on that was a football doc actually last year. Coming and doing the final week to help them get a picture lock, and there were 3 editors on it. And I was kind of watching stuff on the first day thinking there's no way they're gonna get this into shape by the end of the week. But like the 3 of them were like incredible. By the end of the week, I was like, fair play. I couldn't have done in a week the kind of precise, efficient, fast work that they did. It's like a situation like that where you think like, oh, okay. If you start to think a little bit like, yeah, I've got some idea of what I'm doing, then you work with people who are, a step or 2 or 3 ahead of you, and you think, okay, cool, that's what I've got to keep pushing towards. So you guys done sports documentaries before, and are you guys football fans? How did you end up working on Welcome to Wrexham?
I'm a big football fan. Yeah, I mean, all the way back to childhood days. And so it took me a little while to get into the sports arena. My path had been kind of more in like some of the true crime stuff, and kind of more like the real heavy, darker sort of stuff. And I kind of hit a point a few years back where I was like, I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, I just need to bring some like joy into the world, and like, I don't know. So I took a pretty hard stance to like I'm not going to take these true crime jobs anymore, which was dangerous. But I did manage. I managed to get recommended for a sports show. It's called Last Chance U. It was on Netflix, about like an American football team, whatever. And that was a really good calling card. Back when that show was really big, it was kind of the way that people talk about like, oh, this is the chef's table of whatever. Like that's kind of what, Last Chance U was kind of one of those like buzzwords, it's the Last Chance U of badminton or whatever. So yeah,
survive now, isn't it? It's drive to survive tennis, yep. Or golf, or
exactly. Yeah, so basically after that, I was able to really pivot pretty hard into the sports arena, and I just loved it. I like, even if it's a sport that I don't necessarily love, like I'm not an American football fan or basketball or whatever, and yet I've done those sort of shows. But the sports is such a good device to just get into very interesting stories, and to like get into these like very human stories, which is like that's what I love about all of this. And so anyway, so getting back to Welcome to Wrexham, this was like it would have been 2020, I believe. I was listening to a podcast, an interview with Rob McElhenney, and he was talking about like their whole venture to buy the club. And he said that they were making this documentary series about the whole journey of it, and that they had hired the production company that did Last Chance U and Cheer. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, all right, we got a Welsh football club. We got Ryan Reynolds and we got Rob McElhenney. I was like, I have to figure out how to get on this show. And I was like, I know I'm connected to the production company. So I like made some calls, sent some emails, just send a cold email to the showrunner, John Hennion. And I was like, hey, you don't know me, but I really want to get on this show. Here's my credits. If there's any sort of availability, please consider me. And here's my resume. He ended up calling me, and we talked for like 2 hours, and like just really bonded and connected and everything. And yeah, and then I was eventually hired on.
How about you, Mohamed?
So I have a little bit of a different story. Because I'm Egyptian and I come from the Middle East, and when I came to the US, I came with like the documentary The Square, and it's about the Egyptian Revolution. It's very political. So I was known for like the doing like political Middle Eastern documentaries. It's because I speak Arabic and I understand the culture. And I held like producers came to me because I knew how to bridge the gap between cultures. And I really enjoyed that. I'm proud of where I came from. But after like 3 years doing the same kind of content, it was tiring because the topics were very serious, and it was kind of crazy, like living in LA and then going back home, like working and just seeing all the footage from the Middle East. And most of it was very like hard hitting stories, and it started really affecting me. And I really wanted to do something different. And a few months before, I got introduced to Andrew Bank from Boardwalk Pictures. We hit it off, and it's like, we need to bring you in Boardwalk and collaborate somehow. Yeah, and one day I got a call from him about Welcome to Wrexham, and like learning about Robin Ryan and the soccer aspect of it. I was like, this is great, man. I really need this breath of fresh air, And I talked to John Hennion, and he was amazing. We hit it off right away. And I joined, and it was an amazing experience.
Are you a football fan, Mohammed?
Actually, I'm not a football
not.
fan, but it's
That's
very
okay.
popular in Egypt. But
Yeah.
I played water polo like 7 years of my life, so I can relate, with sports and the highs and low of it, and the sense of camaraderie and the sacrifice, and all this stuff. So I was trying to project a lot of my experience in my work, and try to bring it in the forefront for the audience.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't that, how you sort of, all these kind of career paths that we take is very unexpected. You go from, you guys both, opposite ends of Africa, but coming from Namibia and Egypt and doing various things, and then suddenly you're working on a show about a working class town in Britain, a football club, two Hollywood guys. It's like all these things kind of coming together. It's crazy. It's always interesting, how people have ended up, and where they've ended up, because everyone has a unique path, even if they ended up in what seems like, oh well, you're a TV editor in Hollywood. Everyone's got a different story of how they got there.
But I have to tell you, this really benefited the show, like the diversity in the edit room. So like, I'm Egyptian, North African, Curtis is South African. So we have Charles is black, and Michael Brown is white, and everyone comes from a whole different cultural background. So like the way you perceive the footage is different, and your choices are different, and the basis for your choices are different. And we used to have all these like deep conversations about why we chose this soundbite, or why this specific scene is important. And it's really fascinating how different we are, and the kind of work that we do to bring our thoughts together and try to create something that is like relevant for everyone. And I think this gave the show a unique kind of depth.
Yeah, it also it affected even the way that we like cut the games and stuff, because obviously there's so many matches that you have to go through, but like, because I have love football and everything, like I probably had a tendency to want to like actually play the moments out a little bit more, because like I see like, oh, this little move or whatever, it's set pieces and stuff, like, oh, that's so cool, let's play that out. Mishu may you want to do more like montages and just like, let's get all like the nice beautiful moments. And
exactly,
so it's and like both are valid, and so I think like us sort of being able to come together, learn from each other, and then I think it worked out well.
Yeah, it's just like blending, like, for example, this is a great example, Kurt's actually like blending, like how Curtis is so into the sport, and like that's an important tackle, or that's an important move, plus like maybe me is like, oh, I love this like slow motion shot, and it's so beautiful, and just blending this with that, that's the kind of depth that I'm talking about. But also, this is a very simple example about like editing a game, but also in the like personal aspects of our characters and how we're threading the arcs, and what is an important beat and why it's important, you know, and these kind of conversations are what sparked that.
Yeah, I think it's because I have the same thing, Curtis, that I'm, as a football fan, you're cutting it, and the note I usually get is like, needs to be shorter, needs to be shorter, because it's kind of you become a little bit indulgent in terms of like, oh yeah, but this and that, in the last football doc I was working on, I was there cutting the kind of the big game at the end of an episode, and that my edit producer was not a football fan, and so we had this kind of debate of like, she was like, oh well, this is not interesting to me, and I'm like, well, it's interesting as a football fan, and a lot of the people who'll be watching it probably football fans of that particular show. And I think that's one of the things that was interesting about Welcome to Wrexham, is that it's not, yes, it's a football show, but it's also really pop. I've got friends and so on who have watched it, don't care about football at all, but have watched it and enjoyed it. Obviously, Rob and Ryan are a good kind of way into that, but I think it does a really good job of, I think when you said before, you use kind of sport as a way to talk about other things, and I think it has a really nice balance of this kind of hardcore sports stuff, but has a lot of character stuff, and it has a lot of, the sense of the community. And I was just, when I was kind of making notes and kind of rewatching the finale, the way you kind of cut out of the game at key moments, and you come to these sort of like very personal bits, with the players, but also with the lead singer of the band, and he has this kind of the letter about his scan, and that could feel very kind of gratuitous, but it doesn't at all, because it feels like the team cares, like how. I guess that's one of these difficult questions to answer. Like, how did you do this thing that you spent months and months and months doing? But how did you? If you could answer this, how did you find that way, or was it just something that, because of the people you are and because of the team that was built, it's something that came kind of, yes, with a lot of work, but did it something that came naturally? This kind of balance of a people-centered kind of series.
Yeah, I mean that's the approach to the whole show actually. Like, and this was one of the challenges that we've been facing, and this was the solution to it. And the challenge is the footage is so repetitive, right? Like you go to practices, and then you have matches, and then you have after the match, So how do you approach this in a way that every time feels fresh and new? And it was always from a perspective of a character. And every episode had like a 2 or 3 character that we're focusing on, and everything is thread around them and around their story. So some matches were about one of the fans, and some matches were about the coach, some matches about some of the players, and knowing and understanding what is the theme of every episode before you start it, and you build everything around it. And also, I think this like broke the idea of getting into the nitty-gritty of sports and the details of it. Sports is just the what's from the outside, but what it's really about is about the people.
Yeah, and like in terms of the finale, that the idea of like sort of breaking those like sort of key moments and flashing back or flashing forward, that, as far as I remember, that started with our showrunner John Henney, and he kind of had the vision of like, okay, well, this episode, again, we have all of these storylines that we've been following throughout the season, and throughout the show. Scoot is a great example of that. The guy, the musician, there was a previous episode where he is going in for his chemo, and like while he's getting treated for his cancer, there's a match happening, and they're singing his song like at the stadium. And so it's like it's all kind of like just connected. So yes, like the entire show was kind of following the perspective of 1 or 2 characters, but in the finale, it was like we kind of had to wrap all of it up, while still kind of maintaining that strategy of like, this is about like these individuals. And so it kind of just turned into this like little vignette of like the match sort of represented moments in everybody's life. And we were able to, and that was kind of like the solution to that, of like, we're going to use this match as a way to launch into these different vignettes, and then it'll all sort of come together at the end. It was also like the perfect match to do that in, like such a high scoring game, so dramatic. It was perfect.
Yeah, and also to give you like a backstage story, I was against this approach with John. I was like, why are we breaking the match? You know, like the match is so strong. We need to stay in the match, you know. And it's like, no, it's not about the match. It's about the characters, you know. And he was right, honestly, and he was right. And like, if editors are the ones, or like aspiring editors are the ones who are watching us, like this was a great lesson of like, try to, you know, open your mind to things that may not seem logical for you, you know, because most of the time these are the great stuff. This is the genius stuff, the new stuff that makes the work different. But obviously after a while, like after some debate with John, I went on board and I aligned with the vision, and the episode became what it is.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, obviously you guys are up for the Emmy, and you get this kind of debate that goes on of like, well, how do you tell what's good editing? And I think that's a question that people who don't know much about editing, do find difficult, because it's like, well, I watched it and enjoyed it, but I also watched and enjoyed this other thing. You know, I was thinking about this the other day, talking to people who aren't editors, talking to kind of people who are aspiring editors. You know, it's kind of that thing that like editing isn't editing. Editing is about the people, and it's about the emotions, and it's about the empathy that you have with all those characters. And I think that's one of the things that the episode does really well. Another thing that I quite liked in rewatching it is that sometimes I, even working with that kind of experienced filmmakers and so on, that sometimes quite often come across people who have a bit of a reluctance to sort of, especially in documentary, a bit of a reluctance to kind of be explicit about certain things and be kind of clear and obvious about certain things. And, like the finale starts with, there's a little sort of preparing montage, and then we're straight into, it's the playoffs. And then I think it's Phil who says, if we win, we're through. If we lose, we're out. And then you've got a little on-screen graphic, and it's very like, okay, first thing we'll do was just talk about the stakes. Sometimes I come in on projects where they're a bit, we don't want to talk about that, it's boring. Or I watch rough cuts of things where, like, a guy finishes fourth and he's heating, and you're like, well, is he through? Is he like, is this good? Is this bad? And so I think it was really interesting the way you did that. Like, is that how the episode was originally planned to start, or is that just something that came out of the process?
I think, like, as editors, I think there's a tendency to always want to be like subtle and nuanced about everything, and not be like, oh, we're going to just like hit our audience over the head, which is great. But I think you also have to like pick and choose the moments that are important to do that. And I think we kind of figured early on that understanding how the whole English football system and everything works is not a time for subtlety. Like, let's just explain it, make it super clear, and then we can put that aside. And then we can like, we don't need to worry about like trying to weave in the nuances of, the system and everything and how the playoffs work. It's like, we'll just address it, hit it over the head, and then we can spend that sort of subtlety and stuff with our characters, because that's really where it's important. Like what football means to these individual characters is much more important than how the system works. So
yeah, but also I think to double down on what Curtis just said, the balance of explaining stuff. You don't want like we didn't want it to just like, okay, this section is about like understanding, the whole English football and how these tournaments work. It was like, okay, when do we need to explain something to help the scene? Like as you said, like when Phil said, if we lost, we're out, and then you explain it here because it's important in the context of the drama, because now you set the stakes, now the pressure is on, and now you really like let the viewer focus on that. That's the pressure. Now watch it, and then you throw them there, and then you can be subtle, after setting up the stage.
We're also like making this for like I mean, I love that it has had a global effect. You know, but it's like, okay, if we can make Americans understand how the system works, then we've done our job. So, you know, let's break this down. Let's make it super elementary or whatever, and give them sort of just enough information to understand how the whole system works. And then we can move on. A great example of that was in the FA Trophy episode, I believe it was, or it could have been an earlier one, but Humphrey, who's the director, I don't know, the one executive, Humphrey Carr, he's basically trying to explain how the FA Trophy works. And it's like, okay, well, you have the FA Cup, you have the FA Trophy, it's happening simultaneously with the league. And it kind of ends it with like, don't worry, we've been doing this for hundreds of years, just enjoy. And it's like, oh, okay, I don't need to get caught up in all of the nitty gritty details. I can just enjoy it. So
yeah, it's always that balance, isn't it? Of, you know, I was thinking about like there's too much information which is boring, and there's too little information which is kind of confusing. And then the part of the trick is to find, you know, where do we spend a bit of time explaining something, and where do we just kind of go, okay, fine, you'll figure out as we go along. Because it's, you know, the playoff system is, you know, there's a lot of leagues in English football that do that, but, you know, the Premier League doesn't. And it's quite, that to me always felt like quite an American thing, kind of playoffs. So I guess Americans would be broadly kind of familiar with that.
Yeah, that it made more sense, I think, to an American audience.
Hmm.
Yeah, but also I think you put your hand on like the a tricky part, which is like the balance between everything. And I think that's the essence of editing, you know, being able to give just enough information to enjoy the scene and stay in the scene just long enough so that you connect with the characters and get what you want out of it, and then move on. And that's what we've been trying to do throughout the show, is like we're cutting between storylines, which is like Rob and Ryan, the fans, the players, and we're going through, you know, around the horn between these three categories of characters, and trying to build arcs, and balancing between the excitements of the match, the highs and lows of it, the humor, and the explanation. And these were the actual elements that we've been going around throughout the show.
So you mentioned that the idea for coming out to the characters at the kind of key moments in the match was something that came from this showrunner. Is that in terms of, you know, how that episode came together? I'm guessing it was one of the later ones that was kind of started. But when you guys, whoever it was who kind of first started on that episode, was there kind of a script for that episode? Was there a plan that was kind of the kernel of that idea where you ended up in terms of structure, or did you start with somewhere else and start building it in a different way, only to uncover that later on?
Yeah, so this is how the editing process works. So like the John, our showrunner, they go and film stuff, right? And then, okay, this is for the final episode. So he sits with the story producers, and then they watch footage, see the interviews, and basically script it, and then they put it on Google Doc, and then they bring the editors in, and then they pitch us like the structure and how we want to tell the story in this specific episodes. And then the editors come in with their fresh perspective, and then be like, oh, this is, you know, maybe this would be a nice place to transition, let's move this from here to there, you reach a point basically where you're comfortable with it, and then you start doing it. Not every time when things make sense on paper, they work in the edit. So there's a process of experimentation. So you can plan as much as you want, but when, as an editor, when the scene is prepped for you, and you have like the B-roll and the verite and the interviews, it's really up to you to shape it the way you see fit, and finding the right tone and pace and mood for it. And it's exciting after doing that, and then going back to your showrunner and trying to surprise them. Like, see how your vision was, and that's how I did it. You follow the vision, but also you try to put a spin on it to make it even better. And it was, this episode was a great collaboration. All of us chipped in, and everyone had their own, you know, addition to it. And you have like Curtis, the master of transitions, you know, he did like amazing transitions between, you know, the games, and going back to the characters to tell their backstory, but then also to conclude it.
A good example of like what Misha was saying was that the opening sequence when everybody's like going to the stadium. So like in the outline, it would have said fans arrive at the stadium. And that's kind of like, that's that beat. And then we move on to the next thing. Michael was the editor that kind of cut that sequence. And, you know, he saw it as an opportunity. I've praised him many times on this whole thing, where it's like, I think like most editors would go in and be like, all right, it's top of the show. We got to make this exciting. Let's get like loud, like, you know, percussive music going and like make it like everybody's pumped or whatever. Got to get excited for the game. And Michael went like the opposite way. And he has this like beautiful, like sort of choral track underneath that's, it feels like a religious moment, a spiritual moment. And it was very purposeful, because people in that town talk about like the race course, that stadium is their church. Like that's when they go to those games, like they are going to church. And that was like, he was like, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take that concept and we're going to apply it here. And it's like the rituals that everybody goes through, like on their way to the stadium. Like that was his idea. And so that's like one of those things of like, okay, here's what we need to accomplish. And then a great editor like Michael takes that idea and makes it so unique and special.
Yep.
There's a great shot in the in that opening that's like feels like a really nice bit of visual storytelling. It's one of them cleaning the pumps in the pub. It's kind of close shot, and it says like getting ready for the big day. It's just like a lovely little shot that just like tells you exactly what you need to know. So in terms of kind of the hierarchy, for want of a better word, how did you guys? So you had a showrunner, you had story producers. Did you have individual? Obviously loads of shows do things differently. Some have edit producers, some have a director across multiple episodes, some have a director on each episode. How did the kind of hierarchy work in terms of this show?
We had so John Henyon was the showrunner. We had a co-EP, co-executive producer of Post, which was Alan Bloom. And then underneath that, it was pretty much us editors, a team of story producers. The story producers were, both like writing up like the outlines or scripts or whatever. They would also, help build just real kind of basic string outs of like, here's like the beats from the interviews as they apply to that sort of thing. I mean, we had some incredible AEs that were technically phenomenal, but then also, we would be able to like hand off like little, moments here or there and kind of almost treat them a little bit more like, junior editors or additional editors at times too. Am I missing anything?
No, I think you said it all.
I think I said it all. And we've also, we were in communication a lot with the field as well. Those guys were just incredible. I mean, you can see in the show, it has such a unique sort of palette to it, which made it just so much more enjoyable, like in the edit room. Because I mean, like editors know, like there's nothing more frustrating, like when you have a great story that is shot poorly. And it's just like, you were so close.
But also the way we collaborated on this show was very unique to me. Is like where like no one starts an episode from start to finish. I can start an episode and Curtis finish it, and vice versa. You got different scenes, and these scenes go to other episodes. And the collaboration of it was great. There wasn't like a hierarchy of like a lead editor or anything. It was just all of us doing it. And working with these guys was amazing because everyone left their ego out the door, and the work comes first, the story comes first, our characters come first. I was always pushing forward to like craft these cuts in the best way possible. And like to the point where like, your first rough cuts had like sound mix, sound design, it's very polished, and everyone is great in what they do. And there was some sort of like healthy jealousy of like, oh my God, look what he did with his scene. I have to do my scene better. You do your scene better, and the other editor wants his scene to be even better. So you're always racing to be the best at what you do. And it ended up, benefiting the show greatly.
Yeah, there
I
had
think
to be a lot of trust between all of us too, where like I trusted that like if I had done a sequence and then I moved on to another episode and then Mishu's coming behind me and I had to trust that he was going to take what I'd done and only make it better. And he only ever did. I mean, like all of us, like we only ever, I think, really enhanced the editor behind us on anything.
Yeah, it's like, for example, if I got like an episode from Curtis and there's like 4 scenes that I love, but then I'm doing notes now, but these notes might like affect these scenes. I try to do my best to work around these scenes so that I don't change them or do any like and just enhance them and be able to take care of the notes at the same time.
So how long did you guys, I mean, this is probably a difficult answer question again. How long do you think, how many editor weeks do you think there were on an average episode on the show?
Oof.
Maybe like
I
a year maybe, or a little less than a year for
well,
this one.
that was for the whole.
Oh,
Well, yeah,
talking about the episode or the whole show?
we're talking like the edit weeks on like an episode. Yeah, it's tough. I mean,
Yeah, it depends.
yeah, it's like I could say like for the end product that you saw, maybe 8 weeks combined, but that's ignoring the fact that like so much went on, in the months and everything beforehand. So it's like I can usually give a pretty specific answer, like because we have like a post schedule and calendar, and we have like weeks allocated to the episodes. But this show in particular was a very unique beast.
Yeah, because what happened is that like Rob McElhenney came and had these amazing notes that really turned the show around. Starting adding the humor and making certain episodes shorter and moving stuff around, and it's very refreshing because he comes from the scripted world, and his nuances and additions and techniques were a little bit new to us, and he kind of pushed the boundaries of the medium and made the show very unique. Also, most of the humor that is there is because of his additions. Most of like the funny texts and translations and all this stuff it's all his spin on it. So this extended the process a little bit, but it was very beneficial.
Yeah, I think it probably took us about, I would guess, 4 to 5 weeks to get to like a rough cut version of the finale, and then it was like just kind of continually revising it and enhancing it and tweaking. There was a lot of that. Like I think we actually got to like that rough cut, like the build stage, fairly quickly. But then a lot of adjustments and stuff after that.
Yeah, it was amazing how the post-production was planned, because you have this army of editors, and then you're like, oh, this, for example, episode 4 is due, how can we finish it fast? Okay, bring 2 editors, divide the episode, each one takes an act, and then work on it, and boom, it's done. You met the deadline. It's like it's like an army of people, like soldiers ready to do their mission, and then it was great, but then when you get the notes, things change, because for example, you get a note to restructure something, and you have like these 18 episodes that are serialized, and it's like a domino effect. So when you move a scene, other things crumble, so you have to go and restructure, and you have to have like communication between everyone. Okay, guys, this scene is moved, like this story beat is moved from here, so this will affect this character arc, so how can we solve this? So there's always this line of communication of how we deal with these kinds of challenges.
Were there any kind of big ideas that kind of fell by the wayside in terms of the kind of the shape and the style of the show? Do you think that how much evolution was there from that kind of initial plan and that initial pitch to you as the show as a whole went on? Or was it that there was a very clear idea of, what everyone wanted to achieve at the start, and then it was just a case of making sure that let's find the best way in which to enact that?
It evolved again, like, the unscripted process is about action and reaction, right? So like, for example, as we said, like John Hennion would like give us the brief, you react to his brief and then take action. You give him something and then he takes what you did and then he reacts to it and he gives you notes. You take it to, for example, our production house, Boardwalk. They take it, they react to it, they give it to you, you take their note. So it's like this evolution, and then at the end is like with Rob and Ryan came in the same thing, and it just keeps evolving. It's very hard to have like a blueprint for non-scripted, because there's a lot of magic that happens in the edit room, and we have to embrace that. But one of the things is that like our amazing production team, they've been embedded with these characters for a very, very long time, and they brought all this amazing verite footage, and these characters, like, it takes time for them to open their hearts for you. And so one of the challenging stuff is that you have great stuff, but still you have the show that is, you have duration, you can't put everything in, but I think that the challenge was how we can still put everything in a way that it makes sense and coherent. And the solution was to really boil down and distill their stories to the pure essence. Like how do we mold it to be the best shape possible, and it's not a little bit long or not a little bit short, to do justice for our characters and for the production team. So I think these are the changes that happened, I think.
Yeah, and it's also because like production's happening simultaneously with post-production, naturally, because like we were in post while the season was still happening, and so we're forecasting a little bit of like anticipating, okay, like episode 15 is going to be about XYZ, but like we don't know until it actually happens. For example, like Wrexham plays Dover Athletic. Now, Wrexham is like right near the top. Dover Athletic is like at the very bottom. We just assume we're either not going to play that game or it'll be like in the sort of quick montage. That match ended up being one of the most dramatic matches in Wrexham history, where they were up by 2 and then suddenly we're down by 3. And then in the dying minutes, like Wrexham comes back and like the final score is like 6-5 to Wrexham. And so it's like, well, that ended up being, like a significant, that was like the final act of like the episode that I was in. And so there's like, and we could not have predicted that, like nobody could have. And so there's just things where it's like, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. There could be there were probably games that we were expecting were going to be like really intense and ended up being like, but you find uses for it. There was actually one game that we were, that we thought was going to be like a really intense one. And it was a 0-0 draw. But it happened to be the one game that like Rob was watching back in the US, like at his pub in Philadelphia. And so they're like watching the game and all of his friends are like, we want to be excited for you, but this is really boring. And so it was like, oh, okay, like we can highlight the sort of difference in culture between America and the British, the way that we all like view the sport or whatever. So it kind of worked out, and it's like it's always, again, just always changing. And yeah, I think to answer your question though, I don't remember any like really significant things that were like left out of the show. They may have, if there were, like they may have felt significant in the moment, but then you're like, I think it worked out.
Yeah. It's been
great. Back when they used to do deleted scenes on DVDs, I don't think I ever watched a deleted scene that I thought, why didn't I have that in? Because there were always kind of like tiny little things that you're like, oh sure.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying about unscripted is kind of, I cut fiction and I cut documentary. And when I did my first fiction feature, I was like, okay, here's a big thing and this is difficult and it took a long time. And then I did my first feature doc and I was like, whoa, this is like 10 times more difficult, not just in terms of the sheer amount of material and the fact that when I started on that, it was basically a 1-page thing from the director and it was like kind of 6 themes. Maybe we'll do it chronologically, but just in terms of like psychologically as well, that thing of you've got to put one step in front of another. And I think, it sounds like you guys were part of a great team that did feel very collaborative and did feel that you kind of had, each other's backs and that you were able to kind of elevate your work. Just as a final question, is there anything that you kind of thought that you kind of missed in terms of a scene or a sequence or a moment or some like great bit of work that you did yourself or that one of your colleagues did that for whatever reason didn't end up on the show that you would have loved to have had on a deleted scene somewhere?
No, I don't think so. On the contrary, like you see your scenes, like for example, we used to work a lot on sound design and polishing these scenes and adding like good reference music, like to be a starting conversation with our amazing composer. But then you watch the episodes and you find like, oh, like the sound design is so enhanced, like the picture is so amazing, you know. And some of the reference tracks that we used were licensed, you know. There's something very unique, you know. And be like, oh my god, like the FX really honored our work, you know. It just took it to the next level. And there's something about you as an editor when you're working with the low res stuff for like 6-7 months, and then suddenly you see it on the TV, you know, all polished and sound mixed, and you know, you'd be like, oh my god, this is so beautiful, man. I didn't know that it's that beautiful, you know.
I went to an FYC event here in Los Angeles for Welcome to Wrexham. I took my son to go see it, and seeing it in a theater. This was like at the Saban Theater, and like seeing it on the big screen with like big surround sound. I was like, oh my, this is so cool. I was like it felt like I cannot believe that we got to just be involved in this thing, let alone like actually sort of like craft it or whatever. But yeah, no, I mean, I'll second what Mishu said with it. It's also like, it's funny, like when our whole team were like, we've been texting each other about like the finale, like wanting to, you know, revisiting it to like for these different interviews, and us like all having to like ask like, did you guys work? Did you do this part? Like, and at times being like, I think I did. I think that, but I think because again, it was like so collaborative. Like we all had our hands on, you know, like every different element that like there truly didn't feel like I had my thing in the show. It's like, it is just a truly shared thing. So I don't feel like a personal ownership, but I do feel like this collective ownership of it.
Yeah, it's such a privilege to be able to cut, you know, shows like this and be able to tell these kinds of stories with like amazing and interesting characters, and you know, collaborate with great editors and, you know, showrunners, and your work being honored that way. It's such a privilege. I'm very grateful to be in that position.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for your time and for your insight. Obviously I'm going to be rooting for you. But I guess win or lose, it sounds like it's been a very satisfying and positive working experience, which is the kind of thing that we all want to have, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.